With the success of the Trinity test in July of 1945 in New Mexico, immediately memos were sent out reporting kind of the incredible power of this new weapon, the devastation, and its potential use and speed of manufacturing additional bombs with a general timeline. President Truman is actually at a conference. This is the last of the big three conferences in Germany, Potsdam, Germany, at this time. And he's really insecure. He is very nervous of having to face off with Stalin at these meetings. It's pretty much understood that the Soviets are going to be a problem with the end of the war and what follows. And there's a sense that we need to kind of demonstrate American resolve and power, right, to gain their respect. And part of that, again, is influenced by Truman's own personal feelings and concerns at this time as president. And when Truman gets the memo of the Trinity test, he is emboldened, right? He's almost happy to some extent. And he kind of hints to Stalin at one point that, we have a weapon that can like win the war without telling him what it is. And Stalin very calmly just looks at him and just nods his head and says, good, I hope you use it. And Stalin already knows about the Manhattan Project. And we're going to, we can talk more about that in the Cold War unit. The big thing is not, are we going to use the bomb? That's something that people still argue about today, and that really wasn't up for debate. You're not going to spend, clearly over $2 billion on a secret project in the 40s, right, and not use it if the war is still ongoing. A big justification for use of the atomic bomb is to finally just end the great conflict. The government was running out of money for the war. Bond drives were yielding lower amounts of money. There's a sense of sort of low morale, right, and eagerness for it to be over, especially after Nazi Germany had surrendered. And the sort of fanatical defense put up by the Japanese and the heavy casualties, right, from Iwo Jima and Okinawa are really trying the resolve and patience for the American people. So the big thing is, where are we going to use it and how soon? So by late July, early August, President Truman makes clear that he wants an ultimatum sent out to the Japanese people and the Japanese government. You either accept unconditional surrender or face total annihilation. And again, the military government just doesn't buy it. They call what they believe is a giant bluff. And what ends up happening is targets have to be chosen. President Truman makes clear that he will be using the bomb. Some of the scientists in the Manhattan Project had written letters urging the president to consider maybe a demonstration, right, to members of the Japanese government because of the awesome potential and devastation of the weapon and the fact that most of the casualties are going to be civilians anyway. Ultimately, that's not accepted. Looking back, one of the criticisms of Truman is that maybe he was rushing the timetable, not so much to save American lives because we could have delayed, right, invasion operations that were being planned, but more so to, have Japan declare surrender before the Red Army, right, Stalin and his forces could actually come in a big way and start attacking Japan, demonstrating that we don't need them, right, to defeat the Japanese. But aside from that debate, the targets are discussed. Tokyo is not selected because the emperor is there, and we don't want to wipe them out. The other target that was brought up was Kyoto, the ancient cultural capital of Japan. Secretary of War Stimson, who really oversees the Manhattan Project for President Truman, really puts a kibosh on that. Him and his wife, I believe in the 20s, had honeymoon there, and they said it was too beautiful and too culturally valued by the Japanese people to just level. So Hiroshima is selected as the first target. This is seen as a military target. It was largely untouched by the sustained bombing that we had been doing to Tokyo and other parts of Japan up until that point. And it's seen as another important target because the bomb is going to be an airburst bomb. And so if you pick a target of a smaller city, right, located in a valley, it will concentrate the power of the bomb. And so you can see here the pilot of this mission, the Enola Gay, ready to fly off with the bomb. And on August 6, 1945, it is dropped on the city of Hiroshima. It is shockingly effective. Again, when it explodes, I'm going to show some pictures. Generates this huge mushroom cloud, which becomes synonymous with the atomic age, right, and nuclear weapons. And it essentially wipes out most of central Hiroshima. This is a photograph of what the city looked like before the bomb from the air, and that's what it looks like afterwards. Again, this tremendous fireball. A lot of eyewitnesses who were there, who were not immediately killed, those that kind of saw it in the distance said it was beautiful, that when the flash went off, you could see every color of the visible light spectrum. Again, before the fireball, grew, and so did the lethal burns as well. And this is another photograph from Enola Gay of the devastation. Pretty much every wooden building is gone within a mile radius of the bomb. Here are scorch marks, again, the intense burning that occurs. And if you go to Hiroshima today, there was a public building that was almost underneath the bomb, Little Boy, as it was called, that detonated. And what you see right here was a man who was sitting on the steps of that building below it, who was vaporized into the stone. And that is now referred to as an atomic shadow, demonstrating kind of the fearsome power of this new weapon. And what ends up happening on August 6th is when the Japanese government gets reports that Hiroshima has been leveled by one plane, one bomb, they don't believe it, and they're kind of scrambling. And 3 days pass, and Truman doesn't get a surrender, and he had authorized by August 9th to drop a second one. And that occurs on the city of Nagasaki. And again, here you can see at the top of the photograph, Nagasaki before the blast and Nagasaki after. Again, most of the city just totally leveled. This is another photograph closer to the ground of the devastation at Nagasaki following that bomb. And on August 9th, the Japanese government formally surrenders to the U.S. government. They say that they're done fighting. So in Hiroshima, when that one blast, 80,000 civilians died. In Nagasaki, it was around 100,000. Many more will die due to injuries. There's horrific accounts of people, obviously being horrifically maimed by the debris, horrifically burned, all sorts of things, horrific injuries to the face and the eyes, skin coming off, and so on, really horrific things. And many more will die due to lethal doses of radiation, organ failure, cancers, things like that. But simply the news that these weapons, right, these secret weapons had ended the war so definitively, right, and so quickly when used, was greeted with applause in the United States. The American people were just simply relieved that we had finally won. And what ends up happening are celebrations. And this is a famous photograph in Times Square. You guys have likely seen this before, of a sailor grabbing and kissing a young nurse in celebration. So on September 2nd, 1945, we have what's called VJ Day, and this is Victory over Japan. And in September, the emperor's government formally signs the Articles of Surrender in Tokyo Bay on the USS Missouri. And this is formally seen as the end of World War II. Now, this man right here is General Douglas MacArthur, and he was the guy that had lost the Philippines after Pearl Harbor, famously said, "I shall return." He was there when we liberated the Philippine Islands, and he'll be there at the end for the Japanese to sign the Article of Surrender. He's also placed in charge of occupied Japan, so he's going to oversee it. And one of the great tragedies is that one of the justifications for the uses of these atomic weapons with horrific civilian casualties in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was that the Japanese needed to be forced to agree to unconditional surrender, that we would set all terms. They couldn't get anything without surrendering first. And one of the things that was a sticking point for them was they wanted to be assured that they could keep the emperor. And Truman claimed that that had to go. Well, when MacArthur is put in charge of post-war Japan, right, occupied Japan, he convinces the U.S. government that this new Japanese constitution must maintain the emperor. So again, a lot of critics of the uses of the bomb will claim that that justification is invalid, all right, that we needed total, surrender, unconditional surrender first, wasn't proven out by what followed. And what you see here is a very tragic photograph. This young woman back was exposed to the sort of intense heat of the blast, and you could see the pattern of her dress was imprinted on her skin because of the intense heat. And in Japan, the survivors of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are called hibakusha, and they were a living memory of the shame and defeat of the war, suffering, horrific effects on their own bodies, right? Disfigurement, other complications due to radiation exposure. And so not only are they physically scarred for life by American weapons, right, as a result of the war, they're also sort of shamed by their own people. They're ostracized because they're that sort of living memory of the tragedy of World War II. So there's a real human cost in Japan with the end of the war that we should not understate. And just to wrap up real quick, if we go back, right here, The Falling of World War II. It's a long video, but I would encourage you guys to watch it. World War II is considered the most destructive war in human history because there's not a definitive tally, really, of everyone who died. It was global in scope, huge numbers of military casualties on both sides, but there's really almost an untold number of the civilian losses as a result of the war, from direct bombings and shootings and massacres and all these other things to indirect starvation, disease, and things like that. Of all the powers that were involved in World War II, it's estimated that the Soviet Union, right, suffered the most in civilian casualties. So total Soviet Union losses, military and civilian, estimated around 25 million. And that's going to really kind of be an important thing to remember when we think about what follows, right, in the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. We, the United States, suffer heavy losses from our view. 322,000 Americans are dead by war's end, and around 800,000 injured. But again, in numerical terms, it doesn't really reach, right, the cost that the Soviet Union paid. And what ends up happening is that, at least initially, by September of 1945, again, there is relief, essentially, and happiness that the war is finally over. The American people are not initially fully aware of the beginning of what will be referred to as the Cold War. Okay, and therefore, that's the end of World War II.